take that jump, don't fear the fall. Hope when the water rises, you build a wall. Hope when the crowd screams out, they're screaming your name. Hope if everybody runs, you choose to stay. Hope that you fall in love and it hurts so bad. The only way you can know, you give it all you had. And I hope that you don't suffer, but take the pain. Hope when the moment comes, you'll say, hope that you spend your days and they all add up. And when that sun goes down, hope you raise your cup. Oh, I wish that I could witness all the joy and all the pain. But until my moment comes, I'll say, I swear.
Did you know that the average family only spends 34 minutes together each day? In a world where so many things are competing for our time and attention, I'm always looking for ways to help my family make lasting and meaningful memories. That's why for the last 7 years, my husband Justin and I have been taking our kids up to Spring Hill Camp for Kensington's annual family retreat, Rock Your Family. Rock Your Family is so much more than a weekend away. It's a family vacation with purpose. The entire weekend is designed for you to share meaningful experiences as an entire family, as well as to provide intentional programming for your kids, while you get to hear from teachers who are navigating the ever-changing world of parenting just like you are. So bring your whole family for a weekend of memory making, outdoor adventures, and the chance to ride, climb, paddle, swim, blob, and more. Register today at kensingtonchurch.org/RYF.
Rock Your Family is one of the many awesome opportunities we have here at Kensington to jump in with our families and not only have fun together, but also grow and engage spiritually together in community. If you're feeling led to jump into Rock Your Family, if that looks like a lot of fun for you and your family, which I'm telling you it is, I've heard the stories of families that come back from that, feel free to go to our website, kensingtonchurch.org/RYF. Hey, something that happened here on yesterday that was amazing was our Hope Water 5K. And it took place right here at the Troy campus where over 800 people showed up to take part in that. And the amazing part about it is 240 of those people were from the Troy campus. And the Troy campus won the competition. That's good news. That's awesome. Hope Water, if you're not sure or if you haven't heard of Hope Water, you don't know what that is, Hope Water is one of the opportunities around here where we can come together as a community and serve a cause and serve a people in a way that none of us individually could ever do alone. You're running and participating and supporting a cause that provides clean water to the people of the Pokot tribe in Western Kenya. It's an awesome thing to do, an awesome opportunity to jump into, and just a way that we can come together as a community and serve people who are a world away. Awesome thing that is coming up is this week we are in the last week of our series called, what is this series called? I'm blowing it. Bringing Down the House. That's the series. Sorry about that. We're in this last week of our series called Bringing Down the House, and this week we're talking about legacy. But next week we're starting a brand new series called Do Something Beautiful. Do Something Beautiful is a series that is based on a book written by York Moore. And York Moore is an awesome author and speaker, and he's from the Metro Detroit area, and he will actually be here next weekend to kick that series off speaking. And so he's given us this idea of what would it look like if we all understood that we can bring beauty to the world, right, individually and uniquely in our own callings and giftings. And so I'm really excited about that series. One of the things that we're doing as an action step for this series is for the month of July, we're taking Saturday services off. And we're challenging each other to do something beautiful in our communities with that time. So we're calling them Do Something Beautiful Saturdays. So that's not starting next week. We're still going to have service next Saturday. But starting on the first Saturday of July and through the rest of the month, we're going to take those Saturdays off and we're going to do something beautiful in our communities. Y'all are with me? Yeah? Awesome. Hey, I just want to take a moment and celebrate something together as a Troy family. Our teaching pastor, Andrew Kim, is in the house. Give it up for Andrew. And Andrew just completed all the steps for his U.S. citizenship. And what's amazing to me is I didn't even know this took place, this happened, but he is being sworn in as a U.S. citizen at the Tigers game this Thursday. And so, I know, right? All right. Hopefully Andrew can bring him a win. We'll see. But he's being sworn at the Tigers game, and so some of the staff got together here at Troy and said we wanted to go support him. So we wanted to invite you all out as well. We are going to be sitting in section 103. We got the first 10 rows there. If you want to get tickets, you can go online and find tickets there. And let's just come out if you're able and available on Thursday at 1 o'clock. Come out to the game and support Andrew as he's granted his U.S. citizenship. That's awesome, isn't it? Awesome. Well, we have one last thing, and that is on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, we have midweek service right here in the auditorium. But since finally summer is here, it feels like it's been a long time coming, but since it's finally here, we're taking midweek this coming Wednesday outside, where we're going to have fun and games and food, hot dogs and stuff like that out there starting at 5:45, and then we're going to jump into a service at 7 o'clock. So I'm going to invite all you all there. One of our values at Kensington is as a family, and as a family, we want our kids and all that stuff to be out there having fun on the lawn, and then jump in and we'll lift up the name of Jesus together. Are y'all coming? All right, wasn't enough people. Y'all coming? All right, there we go. Well, before we move on with our service, I want to invite you all to stand up and greet somebody next to you.
I used to think I wanted to be famous, that I'd be recognized out in a crowd. But the funny thing is every time I've gotten what I want, it lets me down. Now I just wanna look more like love. I just wanna look more like love. This whole world is spinning crazy, and I can't quite keep up. It's the only thing around that we don't have quite enough of. So I just wanna look a little more like love. I used to think I needed all the answers. I used to need to know that I was right. I used to be afraid of all the things I couldn't cover up in black and white. Now I just wanna look more like love. I just wanna look more like love. This whole world is spinning crazy, and I can't quite keep up. It's the only thing around that we don't have quite enough of. So I just wanna look a little more like love. I find the farther that I climb, there's always another line of mountaintops. It's never gonna stop. And the more of anything I do, the thing that always ends up true is getting what I want will never be enough. Now I just wanna look more like love. I just wanna look more like love. This whole world is spinning crazy, and I can't quite keep up. It's the only thing around that we don't have quite enough of. So I just wanna look a little more like love. Like love.
And this song, I feel like, is a perfect song for the journey that we're on today. Because in it, Ben Rector, the person who wrote this song, says, I don't want to be famous. I don't want to be right. But rather, I want to look like love. Because that's something that has value. That's what I want to pass on to the next generation. And in this series that we've been in for the past several weeks, Bringing Down the House, it's really forced me in many ways to think about the type of father that I have been, the type of father that I want to be, but also the legacy that I want to leave for the next generation as well. And just hearing that song, part of my legacy, I want it to be characterized by love. But something that I realize that is true for all of us is that because we're broken human beings, that the legacy that we leave will be a mixed bag. And that there will be amazing things and great things about it, but at the same time, there'll also be broken aspects of it as well. But the hope that we have as followers of Jesus is that he is able to take what is broken and really truly create something that is beautiful. And so today, as we conclude this series, Bringing Down the House, we're going to be talking about how we can pass on an incredible legacy, a beautiful legacy to the not only simply that will impact the next generation, but also generations after that. Because the legacy that we receive also, something that we have to keep in mind, is very important. And that our legacy that we receive from our parents, our grandparents, it doesn't solidify our path in life, but it does set the tone. And we're actually gonna watch a video with two of our co-founders, Steve Andrews and Dave Wilson, and they have some powerful insights into this whole topic of legacy, because the legacies that they were given couldn't have been more opposite. And so let's watch this video together.
So one of the things that brought us together was a dream about legacy, leaving a legacy for our children, grandchildren, great, on and on. And yet we came from two totally different backgrounds.
Yeah, I remember when you would talk about your background, your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, I was jealous. I was actually envious.
So you should be, because they were
I
awesome.
should have been, but I was. It was like you had this incredible godly heritage passed on to you that you get to pass on. And when I'd hear you talk about it, I mean, I just was like, wow, I didn't have any of that. I mean, you had dogs that were Christians in your family growing up. It felt like that. But and then in 1991 or 92 at Troy High School, you were going to give a message on the weekend on legacy. And I said, what are you going to talk about? And you talk about this incredible heritage that you get to continue. And I said, could I join you and talk about the visceral soul in me that says I have to stop a bad legacy of alcohol and divorce
generations,
and start a new one.
Yeah.
And there's half our audience is probably one of those two sides, either continuing one or changing one. And so we did that message together. I don't know if you remember it.
I do, and one of the things that hit me that actually was kind of discouraging is I found that sometimes when I talked about my legacy from my family, particularly my parents and grandparents, that it actually discouraged people because of that, well, I'll never have that. But you disproved that.
I was discouraged, but I also, it was inspirational. It was like, I want that for my legacy, that they'll look back. Grandkids and great-grandkids, think about that. Someday, they'll be able to say, my great-great-grandparents, Dave and Ann Wilson, changed and created a following Jesus legacy. Again, not perfectly, but man, I get emotional thinking about it because that is what we get the chance to do.
Well, you inspired me to do family fun nights on Friday night, to have events. And
Wilson Party Night.
Yeah, we'd go swim at Adams High School. But it was something powerful of saying it doesn't take that much to change a legacy. Sometimes it's just one decision.
Yeah.
I talk to people all the time, and I see that at Kensington where people are going, I'm changing the legacy that was given to me, and I'm so inspired by that.
Yeah, I mean, the cool thing, what you just said, is we get to change the legacy. Everybody has that opportunity. In fact, think of this. Everybody's leaving a legacy. The question is, are we intentional about what kind? And one of the beauties of being a part of Kensington's community for 30 years is you're watching, I think, thousands of families create new legacies, godly legacies, when they didn't have that given to them, but they said, line in the sand, we start today to change the future of our name. Yeah. That's powerful.
So one of the things that I wasn't expecting was some of the discouragement I felt through the years when I felt like I failed my kids or failed Paula. What do you say to people who are listening today that think, oh, I blew it?
I mean, my first thought is start right now, start today. Because I blew it too. And I have regrets even now, my 3 sons and my daughter-in-laws and grandkids. I mean, they're grown men now, and I have regrets. You know, I wish I could go back and do things better when they're in high school or middle school, and they've shared that with me. But I'm not gonna live in regret. It's like, start today.
Start today.
Do it right today. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of families doing it right now at Kensington. It's like, start today. I hope this weekend, as we talk about legacy, literally changes somebody's legacy. Yeah. They say today's the day.
With my adult kids, I think recreating the legacy was experiencing forgiveness together for ways that we'd failed each other. So it's never too late to let Jesus Christ begin to do this. And I think it's maybe my favorite thing happening right now inside Kensington is people creating these new legacies.
Yeah.
So I love what Steve and Dave had to share with us concerning legacy, the legacies that they were handed. And we're actually going to be referring back to some of what they said later on in the message. But for most of us, we can identify with one of their stories. Because for some of us, we came from a background similar to that of Steve's, in that the legacy that we received was incredible. And that is what we want to pass on to the next generation. And for others of us, we resonate more with Dave's story, because our family legacy isn't something that we want to pass on, but rather we want it to end with us, and we want to transmit, and we want to pass down something completely different. But the truth is that if we resonate more with Dave, the incredible thing that we can have, the reason why we can have hope, as we heard in the video, is that no matter the legacy we were given, we shape the legacy that we leave. And oftentimes when we hear that word legacy, we think of something that a parent passes on to their children. So understanding that, one of the things I want to do today is really expand this whole idea of what a parent is and who a parent is. And we actually did that last week with the idea of fathers. And so I wanted to do something similar in regards to parents as well. Because in this community, we have so many different types of parents. We have parents of biological children, parents of adopted children. We have step parents, foster parents, also mentoring and spiritual parents, incredible men and women in this community who are investing and impacting the next generation. And many of those people right now are in K-Kids, investing in our children. They're up in Breakaway, investing in our middle school students. So what this means is that most of us, if not all of us here, are parents. And as Dave talked about in the video, the question isn't if we are leaving a legacy, but what kind. And back in 1995, there was a movie that was released called Mr. Holland's Opus. Has anyone actually seen this movie? Okay, some of you have. And it's crazy to think that this movie is like 24 years old. And when I first saw it, I remember I saw it on something called a VHS tape. I don't know if you guys remember this. It was like fast forward, rewind, all of that kind of stuff. It was just really interesting in the tape going. And I had flashbacks to that. But this movie is based on a true story. The life of a man named Glenn Holland who lived in Portland, Oregon. And he was a classical musician. And Mr. Holland's dream was to become famous one day. And he believed that his path to achieving this success in his life was writing an opus, creating an opus or a symphony that people would remember. This is what he wanted to do with his life. But until that actually happened, the reality was that he had to pay the bills. And so he got a job as a high school music teacher. So during the day, he would work at the school, and then at night he would come home and he would pour all of his energy, all of his time into creating this opus. But as time went on, the demands of work, the demands of family just became too much, and he realized that he would have to release this dream, that it simply was not going to happen. But fast forward in the movie, towards the end of the movie, there is this scene where he is fighting in vain to keep his job because the school board had cut the music program. But what we see in that scene is that Mr. Holland was no longer a reluctant teacher, but he was someone who was passionate about what he did. And for 35 years, he had invested in these students, not just simply teaching them about music, but truly teaching them about life. And he returns to his classroom. After he's laid off, he returns to his classroom to gather all of his things. And he's walking down the hallway seemingly for the last time when he hears some noise coming from the auditorium. And he thinks it's strange because school had been let out for the summer, so there shouldn't have been anyone in the building. And so he goes to investigate, and when he opens the door, he finds that the room is full of current and former students as well as his fellow teachers. And when everyone sees him, they stand up. And then a band made up of current and former students begins to play one of the songs that he had taught them. And then one of his former students, who's now the governor of Oregon, one of the first students he ever had, gets up to the microphone and speaks on behalf of all of his students. And this is what she said. Mr. Holland had a profound influence in my life. And yet I get the feeling that he considers a great part of his life misspent. Rumor had it he was always working on this symphony of his, and this was going to make him famous and rich. But Mr. Holland isn't rich, and he isn't famous. So it might be easy for him to think of himself as a failure, but he'd be wrong, because I think he's achieved a success far beyond riches and fame. And then she speaks directly to Mr. Holland and says, look around you. There's not a life in this room that you have not touched, and each one of us is a better person because of you. We are your symphony, Mr. Holland. We are the melodies and the notes of your opus. And we are the music of your life. And Mr. Holland, of course, never created that symphony. He never became rich or famous. That was not his legacy. But his legacy was something even greater, because every single day, he chose to love and lead and invest in those students. They were his legacy. And he not only changed their lives, but also future generations to come. And as I was thinking back on this movie, and I was thinking about these words, it reminded me that the decisions that we make every single day, the lives that we lead, will shape our legacy. And so the two questions that I want all of us to consider today are, what legacy are we currently leaving with our lives? And is it the type of legacy that we want to leave? And in really addressing and wrestling with these questions, we're going to be looking at the story of one of the most extraordinary people in all the scriptures. And her name was Rahab. And Rahab lived at a very, very interesting time in the history of Israel, because a man named Moses, who had led the nation for decades, and this guy was one of the greatest leaders Israel had ever known. Moses was the one who had gone into Pharaoh's presence, who was the most powerful person in the world at the time. And he had said to him, just like Charlton Heston in the movie 10 Commandments, "Let my people go." That's what he said. And he's the guy who parted the Red Sea, the guy who brought the 10 Commandments down from the mountain. That Moses was now dead. And the person who was leading Israel was a guy by the name of Joshua. And Israel had just spent 40 years wandering around in the desert. And this had been their punishment for not believing that God could actually give them the land that he had promised, this land called Canaan. But now they are on the precipice of realizing this promise. And imagine waiting for something for 4 decades and then finally being able to take hold of it. This was what was happening. But as they looked into this land called Canaan, this land that God had promised them, there was one problem. There were already people living there. And these people were large people. They were powerful people. They were incredible warriors, which meant that the Israelites would have to go in and conquer this land. And the very first obstacle they faced was this city called Jericho. And Jericho, we understand from archaeological evidence, was a walled city, in that it had 2 walls, in that the outer wall was 40 feet tall, and then there was a steep embankment that led up to an inner wall that was 25 feet tall. And as a result of these walls and this structure, people believed that this city was impenetrable. But Joshua, as their military leader, he was a good one. And so he knew that they were going to conquer this and that God was going to help them. But before they actually attacked, he wanted to know what they were up against. And so just like any great leader, he sent 2 spies into the city to gather information. And when these 2 spies entered into Jericho, they met a woman named Rahab. And something that we have to know about Rahab was that she was a prostitute. And back then, just like today, prostitution was tolerated, but it was not socially accepted. And if you were a prostitute back then, no man was going to shame himself or his family by marrying you. And in a male-dominated culture where the husband was the provider and the protector, being a single woman wasn't a good thing. And when a woman entered into this world of prostitution, either due to desperation or exploitation, it was really hard for her to escape. But in addition to being a prostitute, Rahab was also poor. Because we also know from archaeological evidence that the wealthy and the social elite of Jericho, they lived inside of the inner wall. They lived at the center of the city. And the reason was because this was the most well-protected part. And which meant that as you move further and further out from the city, people became poorer and poorer, and the class decreased. It got lower and lower. And so the people who lived between the inner and outer walls, they were the poor. And Rahab didn't just live between the inner and outer walls, she lived right up against the outer wall. Her house was actually built into the outer wall, which meant that both literally and figuratively, Rahab lived on the margins of society. So Rahab was a poor, single, female prostitute living in a male-dominated society. And to top it all off, she was a Canaanite. And the Jews didn't look well on this people group because they engaged in some terrible practices, at least from their perspective. Things like child sacrifice and bestiality. Horrible things. But when these two Jewish spies, entered into Jericho, what happened was they met Rahab, and Rahab kindly opened up her doors and allowed them to stay in her home. But because Rahab was a prostitute, there were likely men going in and out continually all throughout the day. And it's likely that one of these men recognized these two Jewish men as spies and reported them to the local authorities. And this news quickly reached the king, and he sent a number of officials to Rahab's house demanding this. And these officials said to Rahab, "Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land." But the woman, meaning Rahab, had taken the two men and hidden them. And she said, "Yes, the men came to me, but I didn't know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left, and I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. And so, as you can imagine, this took an extraordinary amount of courage for Rahab, because if these spies had been found, she would have been charged with treason and probably killed. And the reason she chose to make this decision, as she later told the two spies, was this. She said, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. And when we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." And so Rahab believed that the God of the Israelites was the one true God. And so she made this decision, and she said, "You know what? I'm going all in with him. That's how I'm going to live my life." And that's what she did. She risked everything because this is what she believed. And ultimately, when the Israelites conquered Jericho, they spared not only Rahab's life, but also the life of her family. And this decision, it not only changed Rahab's life, but it also changed her legacy. And we actually see this in the Gospel of Matthew, in the very first chapter of that book, in a genealogy. And if you've ever read the scriptures, when typically what many of us do is that when we get to the genealogy, we're like, skip, I'm going to the next page, right? Because it's a bunch of weird names. We don't understand how it all fits together. But this genealogy in Matthew 1 tells us a lot about Rahab and what God chose to do in her life. This is what it says. This is a genealogy. It says, Salmon, interesting name, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. So a bunch of names, a bunch of interesting names. And so let me break it down for all of us. And so this is basically what happened. Rahab, she ended up marrying a guy by the name of Salmon. And Salmon was one of the two spies who had come into Jericho that day. That's how they met. And Salmon was one of the princes of the tribe of Judah, which meant that Rahab, a prostitute, married into one of the leading families in all of Israel. She became royalty. And Rahab and Salmon, they had a son named Boaz. And Boaz married a woman named Ruth, and their story is found in the Old Testament book of Ruth. And they had a son named Obed, who had a son named Jesse, who then had a son named David, also known as King David, one of the greatest kings in all of Israel. And if we continue to read on in this genealogy, what we read are their names that come up. Incredible people of valor, of virtue, and of character. And how the genealogy ends is it ends with that of Jesus, the Son of God, the Savior of the world. This was his family line. And Rahab, God incorporated Rahab into this family line. And something that we have to understand about back then in ancient times was that your family, your lineage was everything. That's where you got your identity from. That's what gave you value and worth. And so God includes Rahab in the greatest family line in the history of the world. And he didn't do this because Rahab was the most talented, because she was the most intelligent, because she had it all together, or because she had accomplished all of these extraordinary things, but rather because of her capacity to believe God in the moment. Because Rahab had a terrible past, and she had made some horrible decisions. But she chose to not only believe God, but also to trust him with her future. And God used her to do extraordinary things. And he changed her life, her family, and her legacy forever. And so one of the things that we're able to learn from Rahab's life about legacy is how we live is what we leave. And that the legacy that we leave will largely depend upon the life that we live every single day, the decisions that we make, the words that we speak. This will shape our legacy. And when we look at Rahab's life, she lived a life of courage, of faith, and of risk. And as I mentioned, Rahab had a son named Boaz. And I can only imagine the stories that he heard about his mom growing up, about how she had heard about this foreign God, how he had freed his people from slavery in Egypt, split apart an entire sea, defeated entire armies. And she said, you know what, I'm gonna follow him for the rest of my life. And so she did. And this decision, as we talked about, not only changed her life, but her family's life, because she risked everything. And it also changed her son Boaz's life. Because one of the things that I believe about Rahab is that after she had Boaz and after she got married to Salmon, she didn't just change the way that she lived, but she continued to live this life of courage, of faith, and of risk. And something that I also believe about Rahab is she never ever forgot where she came from. Because as we talked about, Rahab had been a prostitute. She had been poor. She had been someone who was pushed to the margins of society. She was poor, she was powerless, she was vulnerable for so much of her life. But then she married this man named Salmon, and she became royalty. She had affluence, she had influence. And this is what she came into. But I believe that she never ever forgot. She always continued to see people who were like her, the poor and the powerless in the world, that many of us, unfortunately, including myself, do not see. And that she saw them, and she spent so much of her life choosing to elevate them with the resources that God had given her. And the reason why I believe this is because we see this in Boaz's life. Because Boaz, there's this incredible story in the scriptures about him, about how one day a young woman named Ruth came to gather food in his fields. Because Boaz was a very wealthy man. And this one day, this woman named Ruth comes and is collecting food in his field. And what we know about Ruth was that she was poor, that she was a widow, and that she was a foreigner, which meant that she had very little power, and she was also vulnerable. Sound familiar? And for some landowners, they would have seen Ruth as a parasite, or they would have seen someone who they could take advantage of, but not Boaz, because he showed her extraordinary kindness, love, and generosity. And I don't believe that Boaz learned this himself, but rather I believe that he learned this from his mother. That every single day, she chose to see the poor and the powerless around her. And she chose to elevate them, chose to love them, chose to extend generosity towards them. And I believe that Boaz learned this from the way that his mother lived every single day. This is the part of the legacy that his mother left to him. Not in the words that she necessarily spoke, but rather the life that she lived. Because the truth is that how we live is what we leave. And my parents, they left South Korea and they immigrated to Canada in the 1970s. And after they got to Canada, they started going to a Korean church, not because they were Jesus followers, but because they wanted to meet people who were like them, people who spoke a similar language, people who had a similar upbringing, people who ate similar food. And so the reason why they went to church wasn't because they wanted to worship God or to connect with other Jesus followers, but rather because they saw it more like a cultural center, and that they looked at it as a place where they could network and meet other people. And they did this for a number of years. But then my dad was diagnosed with stomach cancer. And in the last year of his life, he was in and out of the hospital pretty frequently. And the people who came to visit us, the people who made meals for us, the people who so often watched my sister and me were people who were part of this church community. And my dad looked at their life and said that this Jesus person, how does this Jesus person, who is this Jesus person that motivates these people to such extraordinary acts of kindness and love? And so he would see this play out in the lives of these people and how they loved us. And he said, you know what, I want to know this Jesus better. And so what he did in the last year of his life was that he read the Bible cover to cover, every single word. And after he finished reading the Bible, he said that if this Jesus still wants to have a relationship with me, I want to follow him for the rest of my life, however long that is. And we saw this extraordinary transformation happen in his life. Because remember, at that time, he was facing death. He was experiencing incredible pain and also dealing with a ton of sorrow and grief and uncertainty. And during that time, what we also saw was that we also saw this extraordinary hope that he had. He had a sense of peace that truly transcended his circumstances, and also a joy, even in the midst of cancer and pain and death. And this is what we saw. And during that time, my mom also made the decision to become a Jesus follower. And after my father passed away, the years after that were particularly difficult for my family, but especially for my mom. Because my mom, but I know she is incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent. And she's someone who graduated first in her college class in Korea. She had this incredible work experience, but after she came to Canada, none of that mattered. None of that was recognized. And so after my dad passed away, she had to struggle with how she was gonna pay the bills, what she was going to do to support our family, how she was supposed to raise 2 young children by herself with absolutely no family around. And so those years afterwards were extremely difficult for her. But what I saw in her was the same hope that I saw in my dad. I saw the same peace that I saw in my dad. And my mom had this extraordinary trust. I'll never forget this extraordinary trust that even when during the times where we were like, we have no idea how we're gonna pay these bills, that she knew somehow deep down inside that God would come through, because he had every single time. That was his MO, and he did. And so this is what I saw in my parents. And so when I was 14 and I made the decision to become a Jesus follower, a large part of me making that decision was seeing faith truly lived out in my parents' lives. And that they didn't just simply say, hey, read the Bible because that's what you're supposed to do. Go to church because that's what you're supposed to do. What I saw in their lives was this person named Jesus actually made a profound and powerful difference. And I said, if this is the difference that he can make in their lives during the most difficult seasons of their life, you know what? I think I want to follow him as well. And so one of the big reasons why I made this decision was I saw it lived out. And this is part of the legacy that has been handed to me. Because as we've been talking about, the truth is that how we live is what we will leave. But going back to the story of Rahab, God was showing us also through her life that no matter what we've done, no matter what has happened, that our past does not have to determine our future. And it doesn't not only necessarily doesn't have to dictate our future, but also the future of our family. It doesn't have to influence that path also. Because our future isn't determined by our mistakes or our failures, but rather by our capacity to trust and believe in God. And when we do, he's not only able to transform our lives, but he's able to transform our legacy. That's exactly what we see in Rahab's life. And we're also gonna see a powerful example of it in a story of a family. And their names are the Moores, and they're actually a family that's part of our Birmingham campus. And they were traveling down a road that they didn't necessarily want to be on, but they felt helpless and at times even powerless to change it. But when they said yes to God, everything changed. Not only their lives, not only their family, but their legacy as well. And as we're watching the video, we're also going to be receiving our offering. So ushers, if you want to come forward at this time. And if you're a guest with us, first of all, let me say welcome. We're so glad that you are here, but please don't feel any obligation to give. But if you would like to give, there are a lot of different ways that you can do so. The offering bags will be coming around in a little bit. We have online options, and probably one of the most convenient and fastest ways to give is by texting the word Kensington to 77977. But if you are a guest, one of the things that we'd love for you to do if you have a moment after the service is to drop by something that we call the Hub. And you'll see people out in the lobby with bright orange shirts on, and we'd love to meet you and answer any questions that you may have about our community. But if you are somebody who does give, thank you for your open-handedness and generosity, because it truly allows us as a community to make an impact all around the world. And so let's watch this video together.
We were really wrapped up in the rat race. Greg was very focused on his career, a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses. I wanted the life to look a certain way from the outside.
The focus in the family was really just getting the task done, getting the parenting task done, whether it was going to events or changing diapers. It was almost like Tammy and I were just cohabitating.
10 or more years ago, I had called a friend and asked her to go for a walk with me. And my purpose for the walk was to get a divorce lawyer recommendation from her. She was surprised because we had painted a really nice external picture of our family and our marriage. She also asked me if Greg and I, would be interested in joining her at church. I went home anticipating that Greg would say no, and much to my surprise, he said, "I'd love to."
I'm not really sure what made me say yes. Something inside of me just didn't want to give up.
At the service that we attended, we joined our friends. We were sitting with them, and the whole service was about marriage, and they finished the service with a clip from The Notebook, the movie The Notebook.
Something touched both of us while we were sitting in the upper back auditorium at Birmingham.
It just hit us to our core.
We had a tender moment afterwards. We were both sobbing.
And so at the end of the service, we stood in the auditorium embracing.
And at that point, I just turned it over and recognized that we couldn't do it alone. And we needed to make God the center of our marriage. And that was really the only thing we could do.
That was what we needed at that time to sort of tear down the walls that we had built up, enough to say, like, do we have something here that we're willing to work on to save? So while we're trying to figure out our marital problems and what our future's gonna look like, Meredith is sort of on her own journey, and she gets invited to Spring Hill, which I had never heard of, knew nothing about, and her friends were going and she wanted to go, and we're like, great, go to summer camp, sounds fantastic.
I just loved going to camp and feeling close to God. And they talked about, oh, you can have that in your everyday life, you know, just give your life to Jesus. And I was like, oh, great, sign me up.
I go to pick her up, and her counselor approaches me, and she says, Meredith has something she wants to tell you. And Meredith comes up, and she says, I accepted Jesus as my savior.
And I told my mom, and she started crying. And I was so excited going home.
I got really choked up at the time. I got a lump in my throat and, tears in my eyes. And I really have no idea why, because at that time, I really didn't understand what that was.
And at that point, I kind of, as the leader of the family, said, what? she's leading the way. That's not right. It's supposed to be me. So I did a lot of self-examination at that point and said, I really need to step up my game and rebuilding with Christ at the center.
Over a few years after starting to go to Kensington and continuing to go to Spring Hill camps, there was definitely a difference, I think, in the way that we would talk to each other. At first, it was really hard for me to talk to my parents about my faith. I just felt so awkward. But after a while, it became a regular conversation about, what we were going through and where we were at in our walk with Christ.
I couldn't let her walk on that journey alone. I couldn't let her, as a father, constantly wonder why her parents were so divergent from that walk that she was on. And so it really encouraged me, and I know it encouraged Tammy, to lead both kids and to lead our marriage where it needed to go. Every time we stumbled, someone was there. Meredith often was there in a really unspoken way. You'd see her on task with reading the Bible. You'd see her on task with giving grace to friends when they really didn't deserve it, and staying so strong to those principles and values that a dad shouldn't have to look to his 12-year-old daughter to model behavior. I needed to be the model for her.
They've told me a lot of times that I've been a big influence on their faith, but I really had no idea. I just wanted to tell them what was going on in my life and how great it was. It never really crossed my mind that I was having an impact on them.
So for Mitchell and I, as I'm thinking about what I can do for the father-son relationship, different than I was doing, which was, trying to be a pal, coaching every sporting activity I could for him. We needed something that had a faith base to it. So I knew about a study called ManQuest, led by some members of the local community, and we dove into that with some of his buddies, some of the dads that I knew in the Kensington community, and we walked through that study together. And it was a pivotal moment, I think, for our relationship.
So had we not gotten the invitation to church, and I had left that walk with the name and number of a divorce lawyer, I would most likely not be married to my husband. We would not be leading the marriage mentor team at Kensington, Birmingham. Our kids would have a different legacy. And not one that I would be proud of, probably.
I think if we look back, we see how that legacy is very different than it could have been. It wasn't instant. We work daily, consciously, on what that legacy will look like. Man, do we stumble a lot. And the kids know that, and they see that, and we talk about it. But we're on that journey together.
To be able to look back when they're young adults and say, I did the very best I could do. I've given them all the tools, and I really hope that they fly with it now.
When a lot of things have been crumbling, my family has always been there as my rock. If I need them, they'll always be there to pray for me or let me cry on their shoulder, anything.
It's a great story of what God can do, that when we say yes to him, absolutely. Great story. But when we say yes to Jesus, how he can restore, how he can renew, how he can transform. And so in looking at the story of the Moores and what God has done in their lives and how he's transformed so many aspects of their lives, I was reminded once again of the two questions that I posed at the beginning of this message. Is that what legacy are we currently leaving with our lives? And is this the legacy that we want to leave? And maybe for some of us during this message, we've been looking at our lives. And as we've looked at our lives, we thought, no, this is not what I want to pass on to my children. This is not what I want to pass on to the next generation. But in coming to that conclusion, we may feel powerless. We may feel in many ways hopeless and helpless to change because we don't know how to do so, how to leave something different and how to start walking down a different path. And if that is you today, I think what Dave and Steve said earlier in the video can give us so much hope. Because one of the things that they said was that we can begin a new legacy now. We can begin a new legacy today simply by making one decision. Because decisions are incredibly powerful. And a few months ago, I listened to a book called Atomic Habits by a man by the name of James Clear. And in the book, he talks about the power of decisions. And one of the illustrations that he gives is of a plane that's taking off from LAX that's headed for New York. And if you choose, and when it's taking off, when you just turn the nose of that plane by a few degrees, and the people in the plane would never know, but if you just turn it by a few degrees, that plane over the course of that distance won't end up in New York, but it'll actually end up in Washington, D.C. And that's the power of decisions. That even small decisions that we may think, you know what, that's not a big deal. If we continue to make those decisions over a period of time, they have the ability to have a profound and powerful influence on our lives. And so if you are someone here today and looking at your legacy, you're thinking, you know what, this is not what I want to pass on. What is that decision for you? What is a decision that you can make today to begin something brand new? And maybe for some of us, it might be choosing to be much more intentional with our children, choosing to be much more present with them every single day. It might be choosing to invest more in our marriage. For others of us, it may be taking the first step towards seeking help with that addiction that we've been struggling with for years. Maybe for others of us, today is the day that we say yes to following Jesus. After our first service, I was talking to a father and his two sons who are now in their 30s. They don't know Jesus, and this is the thing that he desperately desires for them to know him. And so the decision that God was leading him to make was to have a conversation with them. And maybe for some of us, it might be the decision that God is leading us to is something that we do once. It might be something that we have to do every single day. But what is that decision for you that will begin a brand new legacy and will change not only our lives, but also the lives of our families and the lives of generations to come? Because the question isn't, are we leaving a legacy? But the better question is, what kind? And with Jesus' help, we have the ability to leave something that is special, to leave something that we are proud of, that will impact our family for generations to come. Let's bow our heads and pray. So Jesus, I want to pray for those of us here in this room and watching on stream, God, that we've come to this conclusion that what we have right now in our lives is not necessarily what we want to pass on. And I pray, Lord, for those of us in that boat, God, that you would show us what that decision is that you want us to make. Maybe one time, maybe every single day, Lord, that will begin a new legacy. And as you lead us to that decision, I also pray that you would give us the strength and the courage to really be able to make it, God, because we need your help in this. But something for most of us, if not all of us here, we are parents, God, and we want to leave something that lasts, something that is beautiful for the next generation. And so help us, show us how to do that. And so we pray these things in your name. Amen.
You know, in light of what Andrew said, when it comes to making decisions, I know a lot of the time for me, I think that within my own power, I can make the decision that changes the trajectory of my life for the better. But I'm reminded that Scripture tells me that only what I do for Christ will last. And also, I'm reminded of the scripture that says, apart from Christ, I can do nothing. I am also reminded of the moment where Jesus is speaking to the woman at the well. And Jesus says to her, anyone who drinks from this well will thirst again. But anyone who drinks of the water that I give will never thirst again. We're going to sing a song called Nothing Else. And what this song does for me is personally, it just reminds me that at the end of the day, I can desire a lot of things. I can desire to have a lot of change in my life. But if I don't desire Jesus, nothing else matters. It's all meaningless. But if I relinquish all the power that I have over to Jesus, what he can do with just my obedience and my shift of heart is change the trajectory of my life, the trajectory of my family's life, and even the trajectory of my friends' lives. So this song simply says, I just want you, nothing else. So I'm actually going to invite you all to keep your seats for the first half of this song and just take a moment to just pray, reflect, think. What aspects and what things in your life is it time to say, Jesus, I just give it all to you? What moment can you have right now where you're able to say, Jesus, it's all yours. I don't want anything else but you. I'm caught up in your presence, and I just want to sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment, and I never want to leave. I'm not here for blessings, 'cause Jesus, you don't owe me anything, and more than anything that you can do, I just want you. 'Cause I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. Oh, I'm sorry when I just sang another song. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. 'Cause I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. Oh, I'm sorry, yes, when I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I opened up my heart to you. 'Cause I just want you, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you, yes, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you, yeah, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. I just want you, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else, oh, nothing else will do. I just want you, nothing else, nothing else will do. 'Cause I just want you, yeah. Nothing else, everybody sing nothing, nothing else. Nothing else will do. 'Cause I just want you, yes. Nothing else, no, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else. Sing it one more time. I just want you, yeah. Nothing else, nothing else, nothing else, nothing else will do. Amen.
And so, if today you made a decision to begin something brand new, a brand new legacy to leave to your children, that's something that I want to invite you to do, something that I want to really challenge you to do, is to tell someone about what that decision is. And it could be the person that you came with. It could be a spouse, your spouse, not a spouse, but your spouse. It could be a friend, somebody that you trust, right? But definitely, if you have multiple spouses, that's something different. We'll talk about it. We'll have that conversation another time. But that's something. But I want to invite you to do that today. And before you leave today, you can text someone, you can reach over and tell someone today. But that's definitely something that I want to challenge all of us to do. And if you would like somebody to pray with you, if you would like someone to talk over things, what God has done in your life today, our prayer team will actually be down front. But thank you so much for being here, everyone. Have a great, great rest of your Sunday.